Hello and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about all aspects of the brand new Forza Motorsport game, from the campaign to the car list, to online, to the incredibly controversial upgrade system, and of course everything else. I've been playing this game since the 5th of October, when the early access version was released, and have so far put in probably over 50 hours of playtime, so let's get straight into what I think of this game after my time with it so far. Starting with the single-player campaign, the Builders' Cup. The way the campaign has been designed is an interesting idea. With how you progress through it, it definitely needed more progression than in previous games, and for this, the upgrade system kind of actually makes sense, and isn't too awful, but we'll get onto the subject of the upgrades in more detail in a minute. If anything, I think the campaign is a bit too long and repetitive. I've only done a few Builders' Cups, and already the tracks are starting to repeat. That's kind of another problem. There aren't really enough tracks in this game. There are over 20 of these Builders' Cups to get through, and each one takes at least an hour, so there's probably too much here to do, I think, especially given how similar they all feel to each other. It's not actually a very long campaign, it just feels like it's taking an eternity to complete, because all the events are so similar. If they had some variety, including the fun sort of challenges and things they used to have at the Top Gear track, which again has now gone, that would kind of make it more interesting, and break up the very repetitive racing against AI, which is never the most fun. And then I probably would want a longer campaign. So I think, like with a couple of the previous Forza games, I'm unlikely to complete all of the single-player campaign ever, really, especially the races. If they were to add something different, I probably would go and do some of the challenges and things, but yeah, what they have at the moment is very repetitive, so I doubt I'm going to get all the way through it. Secondly, let's talk about arguably the most important part of a car game, the car list. The car list is mostly very comprehensive, but it is slightly smaller than Forza Horizon 5's was when that game launched. There's a few things removed. It's mostly full of cars that are copied forwards from previous Forza games, including some cars that have been in the game for about 2 decades at this point, that have not been remodeled since then, so that's always a bit of a downfall, is how old the models of some of the cars are. It does seem like they're finally updating some of these car models. At launch, one of the oldest models in the game, the Subaru 22B, which has been complained about quite a lot, has in fact been updated. So let's hope this happens with some of the other ones, if not in this game, in future Forza games. There are also several strange decisions of what to include and what not to include when compared to Horizon 5, for example. Obviously, this game in general has more racing cars, that's a given, but there is one thing that I find quite interesting that they've done with the Maserati MC12 as an example. This game, the Motorsport game, has the road-going version, but not the racing version. And then Horizon 5, the road driving game, rather than the track racer, has the racing version, but not this one. So yeah, there's a few things like that that are a bit odd. There are some other kind of more sensible decisions. For example, they've decided to do away with all of the SUVs, pickup trucks, all the sort of bigger vehicles in this, which on one hand kind of makes sense because this is the Motorsport Racer, and I can see why they're doing it. They're trying to go down this more professional racer sort of look to split it from the sort of more fun Horizon games, let's say. But yeah, it's kind of a shame on the other hand, because it was always quite fun in old Motorsport games to take things that were very much not for the racetrack, turn them into racers, and then take them to the track. Things like the SUV, and then going back further in Motorsport 4, things like the Prius and the Smart Car. Those kind of things people always loved turning into track cars, so it is kind of a shame to take them out, but I can see why they've done it, kind of focusing more on those things in Horizon and these things in Motorsport. I am, though, of course, super happy to see the return of several stunningly beautiful Aston Martins. Have to mention that they've brought back 3 or 4 cars that were missing from Horizon 5, including, of course, my favourite, the 2008 Aston Martin DBS, which, even if there were no other cars in the game, I would be happy to see that in the list. So yeah, great to see that back. I just only hope that comes to Horizon as well. But overall, it's not a bad car list. Next then, almost as important as the car list, the track list. There are several important tracks and track layouts missing from the game, like the Nürburgring Nordschleife, for example. This is because they're remodeling it. Like some of the cars, the tracks are very outdated and were quite inaccurate in some cases. So this will apparently be added early next year, but still it is quite an important track to have left out, especially given this motorsport has had longer development time than any other motorsport game in history. So yeah, they probably should have finished that by now, but anyway, they are promising that being added next year, which is good to hear. In addition to this, though, there are a load of tracks that have not been confirmed as returning, including the Top Gear test track, and the other more open airfield test track, the one that used to be used as a drag strip and playground games location. Not only is that gone, but so are some of the game modes that went with it, as I sort of briefly mentioned in the campaign section of this video. All that there is racing. There isn't any of the mini-games from the Top Gear track. There isn't the airfield test track. Even online is just racing. There's no playground games. So we're reduced to campaign races, online, and rivals. No drag racing, no playground games, no drifting, none of that stuff. So it is kind of quite limited what you can do now. I suppose they're thinking in Horizon you can do all of that, and this will be the more serious racing game, but it is kind of sad to see those things removed, although personally racing was always my favourite part of the game. It was nice to have some variety and other options when you'd had enough of that, for example. As well as the tracks removed though, there are of course some new ones, like Kyalami, and the two beautifully made fictional tracks Grand Oak and Hakone. These completely new routes do look particularly incredible, making the most of the game's updated visuals. Some of the older tracks that we know and love do return, as well as the ones that are missing, most of them having been reworked somewhat, and with some new layouts added in some cases. In a lot of places there are fewer tyre walls of death on these tracks, because they are in theory not necessary to prevent corner cutting now that there is a penalty system for online racing. And I particularly love the new layout of Laguna Seca, or I should probably say old layout of Laguna Seca, the short kind of outer loop, which is apparently how that track was until the late 1980s. So yeah, it's really not a bad selection of tracks. There probably aren't quite enough of them. There are some important ones missing, but there are also some great new additions, and they promise remodeled, reworked versions of a lot of the absent tracks. On to the online then, which is brilliant fun, and unlike the recent The Crew game, actually works cross-platform, between Xbox and PC at least. Sorry PlayStation fans, but you can't get this game. There is a very complete list of events, with a whole list of them for pre-built racers, and another list of events that are class-based, and you can use cars that you have upgraded and tuned yourself, once you've spent many hours unlocking the upgrades, of course. Initially, I was pleasantly surprised by the driving standards online, although this was when the Ultimate Edition came out with 5 days early access, so only really the people with the serious racing interest were playing at this point. Now that it's fully released, and is also on Game Pass, that has substantially changed. Now it's rare that you get through a race without being killed, and finding yourself at the back of the field, facing backwards, just like previous Forza games then. Unfortunate to see that the driving standard in online has not really changed all that much, and given that the collisions are slightly funky, it means if you are bumped, you are likely to spin out and find yourself at the back of the field. There is, though, now a driver rating and safety rating system to try and mitigate that problem, so if you do race cleanly, it supposedly improves, and then you're grouped with similar drivers, although that's not the primary system for matchmaking. That's based on a separate ability ranking, which usually sort of goes with faster drivers tend to be cleaner drivers, but yeah, it doesn't really work. It means a lot of times you are grouped with murderous rammers. It also seems impossible to actually increase your safety rating if it does fall slightly, which happens quite a lot when you're crashed into and the game decides it's your fault. So yeah, this was apparently adjusted as well in the first update, which they've just released, which saw a lot of safety ratings, including my own, fall somewhat, which is a bit irritating because, like I say, it's quite difficult to bring it back up again. But anyway, Online isn't without its bugs either. The cars still spawn inside each other in the pit lane, which is carried forward from Motorsport 7, despite this game having nothing to do with that game and being built from the ground up. As has the problem with some people not being visible to other drivers in private multiplayer, and replays not saving properly, so when you view them, cars don't move. These are all quite important things that they probably should have fixed, given they were a problem in the previous title as well. But anyway, hopefully they carry on bringing out updates. Like I say, they've brought out one so far that fix problems like this in the future. Okay, it's time for it. Let's address the upgrade system properly. I've mentioned it a few times, but let's talk about it in more detail. For the campaign, I actually think the upgrade system works quite well and adds some feeling of progression, which this game desperately needed, although I think there were much better ways they could have done that, to kind of feel like proper progression, rather than a system that they've just put in there for the sake of slowing the campaign down a bit, which is a very repetitive campaign anyway. I think probably what happened is that the system was designed purely for the campaign, without a thought being given to the implications of what it meant for online, or for upgrading cars after the campaign is completed, for example. The problem is really with online, where you want to build up a selection of cars and test to see if they're any good before using them in some races. Here, though, you can't. Well, you can, but at the game's launch, it would take roughly 15 hours per car to unlock all of the parts and be able to build it up to where you want it, or to at least have the flexibility of using any parts to build it up to where you want it, with the possibility, of course, that the car won't be as good as you hoped it would be, at which point it means you've wasted those 15 hours grinding aimlessly, and yeah, you then have to start again with another car. This, though, again, with Update 1.0, has been improved somewhat, apparently. Participating in one Builders Cup will now unlock almost all upgrades for any car, apparently, which I don't think is quite true, but it is still much improved over how it was previously. It does still take a while, though, maybe an hour per car, which is a big improvement over 15 hours, but it still means you have to spend an hour driving a car before you can upgrade it to where you want it to be, with a very unnecessary system, especially as in previous games, we could drive exactly the same car with whatever upgrades we wanted straight away, assuming we could afford it. Luckily, though, there is a way to kind of get round this, to essentially set the assists so that the car drives itself, and leave it leveling itself up, whilst you do something more interesting, like watching some paint dry, for example. So yeah, there is kind of a way to cheat it, but even with this, you have to return every 15 minutes to tell the game that you're still there, basically, so you can't just leave it doing it. But anyway, that's the upgrade system. I hope that it either gets rebalanced more in a future update, or that eventually they just get rid of it, because it is quite irritating. The physics and handling feels pretty good. Remember, it isn't trying to be a full-on simulation. If you want one of those, go and play Assetto Corsa or something. This is supposed to be a fun track racer that's easily accessible to all and can be enjoyed on a controller from the comfort of your sofa. And to be honest, at this point, it's the only game that really does that. Gran Turismo can be played on a controller, but even that is better and faster on a wheel now, but is still enjoyable on controller, of course. This, though, is actually still competitive on controller, so you can kind of enjoy the competition of online racing without taking it too seriously. As ever, it does that very well, filling that gap between simulator and arcade game. It has been a while since I've played a motorsport game, and for the most part it feels quite similar to Motorsport 7, again, despite being not related to that game in any way and built entirely from the ground up. It is slightly improved, but it does feel quite a lot like that game. If anything, cars feel slightly heavier and understeer more than they did in the previous title, and they do still suffer sometimes from uncontrollable twitches. Other streaming services are, of course, available, where the car will snap when you try to save a slide and go off in the opposite direction, particularly in front-wheel drive cars, which is probably slightly more realistic, but yeah, it does it in anything. If it starts to go, you can't save a slide, because it will just snap and throw you off the other way. And As ever, the collision physics are as wonky as ever, as I touched upon in the online segment, so if you are bumped into, even if it's a tiny bump and slightly accidental, a mixture of desync and dodgy collision physics will throw you off the track quite uncontrollably. So it basically suffers from all of the problems of the previous motorsport titles, but overall feels not too bad, much like those games did, and is a slight improvement overall, I would say. Next then, the visuals and graphics of the game. It does look very, very good. I'd probably still say that Horizon is a more beautiful game, but this holds up really well too. They've had the advantage of finally being able to ditch previous gen consoles and release this just on Series S, Series X, and PC. So they've kind of got rid of the constraints that Horizon 5 had. So in some places it does truly look stunning and even better than that game, but overall, like I say, I'd say Horizon's probably still more beautiful. I'm playing on PC, but from what I've seen it still looks pretty good on the consoles too, especially like I say now that it's only on those newer, more powerful ones. It does look very similar in style to how I remember Motorsport 7, although like I said it's been a while since I played that, so it probably has moved on a lot since then, especially now that I'm playing it in 4K with ray tracing, which does improve it quite a lot. Most tracks and cars looked slightly improved, but I have to say the new fictional and reworked circuits, like Hakone, Grand Oak, and the reworked version of the classic Maple Valley, look absolutely stunning in this next gen, or new gen I should suppose, quality. But then things should have moved on really in the 5 or 6 years that it's been since the previous title came out. And finally, last but not least, I have already briefly mentioned Update 1.0, but I think we should finish by talking about that. On the one hand, it's impressive how quickly they've supposedly fixed this long list of issues, which I'll have scrolling through in the background here, but equally the game should never have released this broken in the first place, which to be fair isn't exclusively a Forza problem. Game developers have a habit of releasing games that aren't fully polished these days, and they know they can just update them when the consumers have tested them, which actually isn't really a bad way of testing them. I suppose that's the most realistic results they're going to get, is by just releasing it, seeing what doesn't work, and then fixing it as quickly as they can. But it's not ideal when you've paid quite a substantial amount of money games cost these days to play the latest game. Anyway, there's far too much to cover here to read out everything, but to give you an idea, this is the full list of fixes that came with this update that are scrolling through now. It mostly seems good, particularly sorting out the game's stability, and hopefully giving us less game crashes, which I was experiencing every third race of ours in featured multiplayer, and also the adjusted upgrade system are both game-changing improvements, at least moving it in the right direction. I still think there's more to be done here, but it's good to see that they're making a start. It's not all fixed though, of course. As an example, there's a problem I'm having importing vinyl groups from previous Forza games. There are, I'm sure, still lots of issues like this that still need addressing, but this is for sure a good start, and at least shows that the game is moving in the right direction. So overall, the brand new Forza Motorsport feels like a decent game. Not a truly great game, which it probably should be, given how much development went into it, but a good game. Apart from the few bugs and things here and there, there's not anything truly game-breaking with it anymore, now that they've released that first patch. The upgrade system still isn't great, but it is improved. But the main problem really is that it isn't built from the ground up like they told us it was. I wouldn't mind it not being, it just being a kind of upgraded version of Motorsport 7, if you see what I mean, but they kept telling us that it was built from the ground up in their marketing, which to me just seems to be, well, a lie, basically, and false advertising. I don't know quite how they got away with saying that. It certainly feels very much like the previous game, except with several tracks and game modes missing, a few new cars, a couple of new tracks, and a revised online system. It has, though, so far been good fun, and I am really enjoying playing a motorsport game again, especially online with how the more competitive racing is all laid out. But yeah, it's basically just another recycled game, like the previous few motorsport games have been. It has been a while, though, so to be able to drive newer cars in a motorsport title is still good, and to see some of those favourites return, and a new motorsport game was due by now, even if it isn't as groundbreaking as they would have you believe. Like I say, it is still a good game, it's just not a truly great game. Which means I'm not sure it really warrants the full price, given how much of it is not really new, and some of the car models are nearly 20 years old at this point. Some of them more, possibly. Anyway, despite all of that, I'm looking forward to playing more of this game. I have been enjoying it, particularly the online, like I say, and I look forward to running our own racing series on here. Overall, it's a good game, and I look forward to playing more of it, and hope to see some good updates like the one they've released so far. If they keep moving in that direction, it could end up being a very, very good and enjoyable game. For now, though, for my thoughts on the brand new Forza Motorsport, after my time with it so far, that is going to be all. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back with the next one very soon.